I never thought the thing I'd miss most about my life would be the sound of a spoon stirring in a chipped mug. But that's honestly how this whole story starts, with coffee and a man everybody else stopped seeing long before I did. It was a Tuesday morning at Rosie's Diner in Cleveland, Ohio. One of those gray Midwest mornings where the sky looks like it gave up halfway through becoming a color. The neon sign in the window hummed like it always did. The smell of bacon and burned toast hung in the air, and the regulars were already scattered in their usual spots: truckers at the counter, nurses at the corner table, retirees nursing bottomless refills like it was their final job. I'd been on my feet since 6. My name tag said Mara, but after 6 years of waitressing here, I felt more like "order up, hey you," or "Miss, can I get more ketchup?" I used to imagine a different life: college, maybe a degree in something that sounded important, but my mom's medical bills came first, and then the money never seemed to be enough for anything except the next emergency. So I stayed. I worked. I smiled. Then I went home and worried. I was topping off coffee at the counter when I heard him speak for the first time. "You know what I miss most?" a voice said behind me, soft and tired. Someone remembering how I take my coffee. I turned around. He was standing there by the door, framed by the weak morning light. An old man, maybe late 70s, with a cardigan a size too big and shoes polished like he'd been raised in a different era. His hair was thinning, white and wispy, and his blue eyes were the kind that looked like they'd seen too much and then were forgotten anyway. I'd seen him before, a couple of times. Always alone. Always in the same booth by the window, like he needed proof the world was still out there. He shuffled toward his usual spot, moving slower than I remembered, one hand resting lightly on the back of the booths as if the vinyl could hold him up. When he sat, his hands trembled as he unfolded the newspaper someone had left behind. He stared at it, but his eyes didn't really move. It felt less like reading and more like clinging to a habit that used to mean something. I stood there for a second, coffee pot in my hand, watching him. I don't know why his words got to me so much. Maybe because I was already tired. Maybe because I understood what it felt like to go through life unnoticed, just there, background, replaceable. "Coffee?" I asked, walking over, forcing my usual practice smile into place. He looked up at me with an apologetic smile of his own, like he already felt bad for needing something. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to ramble. Just talking to myself." "Doesn't sound like rambling to me," I said. "Sounds like someone who knows exactly what they want." He smiled faintly and nodded toward the mug. "Well, in that case," he said, "2 sugars, no cream. And if you have it, the sports section." I never really cared about who was winning what, but I've been pretending long enough that I think the universe might get confused if I stop. 2 sugars, no cream, I repeated, like an oath. "And you fold the sports section first, even though you really read the obituaries." The words just slipped out. I hadn't realized until that moment how many times I'd watched him. The way his hands always hovered over the sports pages first, then moved quietly to the back where the names of the dead were printed in tiny columns like they were trying to slip past unnoticed. His eyes widened a little, and they brightened in a way that made my chest tighten. Tears formed at the corners, not quite falling, just waiting. "You notice," he said softly. "Everyone deserves to be noticed." The thought came before the words, like something that had always been there, just waiting for an excuse to speak. "Everyone deserves to be noticed, mister." I hesitated. "Finch," he supplied. "Walter Finch, but you can just call me Walter. I've been Mr. Finch to people who didn't really know me my whole life." "Well, Walter," I said, pouring his coffee carefully. "Everyone deserves to be noticed. Even more so before their coffee." He let out a broken little laugh, like his vocal cords had forgotten how to do it properly. "That's a dangerous amount of wisdom for this early in the morning, young lady," he said. I run on caffeine and emotional damage, I replied. It does things to a person, he chuckled, and I found myself smiling for real, not the fake customer service smile I put on like a uniform. There was something about him that felt familiar, like the echo of a feeling I'd had 1,000 times, the quiet terror of being invisible in a world that only paid attention when you were loud or useful. That was the first morning we really talked. Over the next weeks, Walter became part of my internal clock. The red neon sign flickered on at 6. The first rush of workers came in at 6:30. And at exactly 7:15, the bell over the door would ring, and he'd shuffle in with that same cardigan and those same careful shoes, like he was honoring some private ceremony. By the second week, I was already pouring his coffee before he sat down. 2 sugars, no cream. Mug warmed first, because he said the cold ceramic hurt his hands. I'm too old to be surprised by heat, he joked once. It reminds me I'm still here. I'd fold the sports section, place it on the table, then slide the rest of the paper underneath in the order I'd seen him rearrange it a dozen times. You're going to ruin me for other diners, Mara, he'd say. They don't worship at the altar of my routines like you do. What can I say? I'd answer. I respect a man who knows his rituals. Sometimes he'd just sit there and breathe for a minute before opening the paper, like he had to mentally prepare for another day of staying alive. Between refills and orders, and the constant clatter of plates, I learned his story in pieces. Not in some dramatic all-at-once confession, but in offhand comments, little details dropped like breadcrumbs. Dorothy hated greasy food, he told me once, eyeing the bacon. But she made an exception for diner pancakes on Sundays. I learned Dorothy was his wife. I learned she died 3 years before, after a long illness that had taken everything slow, like a thief who enjoyed the process. I learned he had a son in Seattle, very important, he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Big job, big life. Too many responsibilities to be stuck on the phone with an old man narrating his breakfast. And your grandson? I asked once as I topped off his coffee. Marcus, he said. Smart, ambitious, always on the move. He visits when he can. He paused. He means well. The world just taught him to measure worth in hours billed and deals closed. How often does he visit? I pressed, softer. Walter shifted in his seat. Oh, he said. Holidays. Some holidays, when flights aren't too expensive, when he can get away. Once, maybe twice a year. His voice went hollow for a moment, like someone had scooped out the center of his sentence and left it empty. I don't blame him, he added quickly. People have lives, careers, families. I'm just in between chapters now, waiting for the epilogue. I froze, my hand still on the coffee pot. Something about that hit me too hard. Maybe you're not in the epilogue, I said quietly. Maybe you're just starting a new chapter that hasn't been written yet. He looked at me like I just handed him something heavier than a mug. You really believe that? He asked. I wanted to say no, that I barely believed it about myself, that some days it felt like my whole life was a series of recycling Monday mornings, tied together by receipts and exhaustion. But something in his face made me choose the braver answer. I think the story only ends when we stop caring what happens next, I said. You still show up. You still polish your shoes. You still care how you take your coffee. That doesn't sound like someone waiting to disappear. He stared at me for a beat, and the diner noise seemed to fade. Then he nodded, almost to himself, like he was filing my words away somewhere safe. From that day on, I started doing more small, stupid little things that no one else noticed. If a customer grabbed the newspaper first, I'd quietly fish it back, refold it the Walter way, and set it aside. If the diner was full and people eyed his corner booth, I'd casually steer them toward another seat. Trust me, I say. The light is better over here. Makes your Instagram food pics look less tragic. On his birthday, which he only mentioned once, In passing, I'll be a year older next Thursday, not that anyone's counting. I baked him a small apple pie at home. It wasn't perfect. The crust was uneven, and I might have burned the edges. But I brought it in anyway, stuck a single candle in the middle, and lit it when I brought it to his table. For what it's worth, I said, setting it down, I'm counting. He stared at the pie for a moment like it was a foreign object, then at me. No one has done this for me since Dorothy, he whispered. His voice cracked on her name. His eyes filled. This time the tears didn't just wait, they fell, silently tracking down the wrinkles in his cheeks. He didn't hide them. He didn't apologize. You're the only one who remembered, he said. I swallowed hard and smiled, even though my throat hurt. Make a wish, I told him. He closed his eyes for a little longer than normal, breathed in, and blew out the candle. Later, as I wiped down tables and refilled sugar caddies, I caught myself wondering what he'd wished for. I had a feeling it wasn't money or health or another year. Something about the way he'd looked at me made me think he'd already gotten what he wanted, just from being seen. But not everything was soft and beautiful. I started noticing other things too. How his hands shook more each week when he reached for the mug. How his cardigan seemed to hang a little lower on his shoulders, like his body was shrinking. How sometimes he'd start a story with, "Did I ever tell you about the time Dorothy and I?" And I'd nod, because yes, he had, but I'd pretend it was the first time and let him tell it again. He started using a cane. At first, he joked about it. "Just a fashion accessory," he said, tapping it lightly on the floor. "Keeps the young people guessing if I know kung fu." But the way he leaned on it when he thought no one was looking made my stomach twist. One Tuesday he didn't show up. 7:15 came and went. The bell above the door chimed for other people, delivery guys, strangers, regulars, but not for him. His booth sat empty, the sunlight falling in the same rectangular patch across the table like it always did, but there was no folded sports section, no trembling hands, no tired blue eyes watching the steam rise from his coffee. By 8, I was checking the clock every 2 minutes. By 9, I was pouring coffee for other customers on autopilot, my ears tuned to the sound of the door. By 10, my heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. "He probably just overslept," my manager Rosie said when she saw me glancing toward the window again. "He's old. Old people sleep weird." Rosie wasn't unkind, she was just practical. She'd owned the diner for 30 years and had seen people come and go, some for good. She'd learned not to get attached. But I wasn't there yet, or maybe I was never going to be. I wiped the same clean table 3 times, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to name. What if he fell? What if he got lost? What if he was in a hospital bed somewhere, staring at a ceiling, wondering why no one showed up? What if he died? The thought flashed in my mind like someone had turned off a light mid-sentence. I squeezed the rag in my hand so hard my knuckles went white. When my shift finally ended, my feet ached, my head pounded, and my nerves were shot. I hung my apron on a hook, grabbed my bag, and hesitated by the door. I could go home, shower, collapse, pretend I wasn't thinking about him. That's what most people would do. That's what a normal person would do. You don't go chasing after customers. You don't cross that line. But there was another voice inside me, steady and quiet beneath the noise. If you were alone and didn't show up, wouldn't you want someone to notice? That decided it. I went to the hostess stand, pulled out the big, framed phone book that barely anyone used anymore, and flipped through the pages. My fingers trembled as I traced the tiny letters. There he was, Finch Walter. The address was only a few blocks away, close enough for him to walk when he was feeling strong. Too far if something had gone wrong. I told Rosie I'd forgotten to clock out, then slipped out the back door into the chilly afternoon, my heart pounding faster with every step. As I walked through the neighborhood, small houses with peeling paint and patchy lawns, I Could feel something shifting inside me like gravity gently tilting. This wasn't just a kind gesture anymore. It felt like a line I couldn't uncross, a choice that would mean something I couldn't fully see yet. When I reached his house, my breath caught. It was small but tidy, the kind of place someone had loved once and then tried to keep exactly the same, as if time would respect that. The curtains were drawn halfway. A pair of polished shoes sat neatly by the door on the little porch like they were waiting for their owner to put them on again. I climbed the steps and knocked, my hands suddenly sweaty. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "Walter," I called. "It's Mara. From Rosie's Diner." For a second, all I heard was the distant sound of a lawnmower down the street and a dog barking somewhere. Then there was a faint shuffling inside, like someone dragging their feet across carpet. The door opened a crack. Walter stood there in faded pajamas, his cardigan hanging open, his hair messy like he hadn't bothered to comb it. He looked smaller, older, like someone had pressed fast forward on his body in the span of a week. "Mara," he said, blinking like I was a dream he hadn't ordered. "What are you doing here?" "I was worried," I blurted out. "You didn't come in this morning." He glanced down at himself like he'd just remembered what he was wearing. "I fell," he admitted quietly. "Nothing dramatic, just old bones meeting rude floor. Got back up eventually. But I was tired. Too tired to make it to the diner today." He tried to say it like it was no big deal, but the edges of his words were frayed. "Are you hurt?" I asked, peering past him into the dim hallway. "Pride's a little bruised," he said. "And my hip. But nothing broken. I had one of those nurses come check. They said I was fine for a man my age. Which is code for, we have no idea how you're still walking around." He tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "Can I come in?" I asked. He hesitated for a second, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "You're the first person who's asked that in a long time," he said. The air inside his house smelled like old books and lemon cleaner, the kind of clean that comes from habit, not from visitors. The hallway walls were lined with framed photos, weddings, graduations, blurry kids in Halloween costumes, and for a second I saw a whole life that didn't match the man who kept telling me he was, between chapters. He shuffled ahead of me into the living room and sat down slowly in a worn armchair that had molded itself to his shape. A blanket was draped over the back, folded with the kind of precision that told me he still cared about the small things, even when the big things hurt. "Sorry about the mess," he said, though nothing was out of place. "I've been taking my time with things lately." I looked around. The coffee table was neat, a TV remote, a line next to a pair of reading glasses, a half-finished crossword puzzle and pen. There was an empty mug with a faint ring of dried coffee at the bottom. "You're fine," I said. "Trust me, if you saw my apartment, you'd give me a lecture." He smiled weakly and gestured to the sagging couch. "Sit," he said. "If you're going to break all the unspoken rules about waitress-customer boundaries, you might as well do it properly." I sat down, suddenly aware of how surreal it was to be in his house. At the diner, I was in control. I knew the flow, the orders, the regulars. Here, everything felt fragile, like one wrong move might cause something to crack that I couldn't fix. "Do you have food?" I asked. "I mean real food. Not just cereal and coffee." "I have some things," he said, shrugging. "Frozen dinners, crackers, a suspicious-looking can of soup that might be older than you." "Okay, that's a no," I said. "I'll be right back." Before he could protest, I went into the kitchen. It was tidy, but the fridge told a different story. Half a carton of milk, a few wilted vegetables, condiments, and a Tupperware container with something that had clearly given up on being food. I tossed what was obviously trash, made a mental note of what he didn't have, and filled a glass of water. When I walked back into the living room and handed it to him, he watched me like I was performing some kind of magic trick. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. I know, I replied. That's why it matters. He looked at me for a long time, then took a sip. You remind me of Dorothy, he said. She was always forcing water on me. Said men are just tall, dehydrated children. Sounds like a wise woman, I answered. She was, he said. She married me anyway. We talked for a while, or rather, I asked questions and he tried to downplay the answers. Yes, he'd fallen. No, he hadn't told anyone. Yes, he had a nurse check on him after the hospice service suggested it. No, he hadn't told his son or grandson because they're busy, and I didn't want them to feel obligated to pretend they weren't. Do you have any neighbors who check in? I asked. He hesitated, then chuckled. There's Mrs. Carter next door, he said. She spies through the blinds and reports my every move to her cat. If I don't open the curtains by 10, she'd probably start a neighborhood investigation. But no one wants to be a burden, Mara. Not when the world is running so fast. You start to feel like static. I hated how calmly he said it. You're not static, I said. You're background music. He raised an eyebrow. Is that supposed to be better? Yeah, I insisted. Because life feels weird without it. You only notice when it's gone. He chuckled again, and some of the tension in my shoulders eased. Eventually I checked the time and realized I had to go. My feet were screaming, and my double shift had turned into whatever was worse than that. I'm coming back tomorrow, I heard myself say as I stood. Don't you work? He asked. I do, I said. But I get off at 3. I can swing by after. Bring you groceries. Make sure your soup isn't older than social media. You don't have to. Yeah, I cut in gently. We've covered that part. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, then just nodded. Okay, he said softly. Tomorrow then. When I stepped back out into the cold air, something about the world felt different, not dramatically. Just tilted a few degrees, like a picture frame finally hung straight. The walk back to my apartment was quiet. I passed people scrolling through their phones, parents wrestling with strollers, a guy yelling into a Bluetooth headset about quarterly numbers. Everyone was moving fast, heads down, eyes elsewhere. I wondered how many Walters they walked past every day without seeing. By the time I got home, my body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't slow down. I showered, changed into pajamas, heated up instant noodles, and stared at the wall while I ate. There was a tiny selfish voice inside me that whispered, "You're taking on too much. You barely keep yourself together. You can't be responsible for someone else's life." Another voice, quieter but steadier, answered, "You're not responsible for his whole life. You're just choosing not to ignore that it exists." I lay awake longer than I should have, the image of his trembling hands and tired eyes replaying every time I closed mine. The next day, my manager noticed the change before anyone else did. "You look like you got hit by a truck and then argued with it," Rosie said, squinting at me as I clocked in. "Didn't sleep great," I admitted. "It's fine. Coffee and willpower. That's the whole diet." She handed me an apron and studied my face a second longer. "That old guy didn't show up again this morning?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, glancing at the clock. "It was still early," she hummed. "Just be careful, honey," she said. Compassion is good. I'm not knocking it. But I've seen girls like you burn out trying to save everyone. World's heavy. Not your job to hold it up alone. "I'm not trying to save everyone," I said. "I'm just trying not to pretend I don't see what's in front of me." Rosie sighed but didn't push further. We fell into the familiar rhythm of the morning. Coffee, orders, refills, checks. The bell over the door kept chiming. People came and went. My eyes flicked to the window every time. 7:15 came. 7:20. 7:45. No Walter. By 9 the pit in my stomach was back. At 3 I clocked out, grabbed my bag, and headed straight to the grocery store. I walked through the aisles half on autopilot, grabbing things I knew old people ate in every cliché movie: soup, oatmeal, tea, but also real food. Eggs, bread, apples, chicken. I didn't know what he liked, but I figured anything was better than expired soup and frozen bricks. At the register, the total nearly made my heart stutter. I did the math of my account in my head and winced. Rent, utilities, Mom's old medical debt I was still slowly paying off. Groceries for me, groceries for him. You can't afford this, the practical part of my brain said. You can't afford not to, the other part answered. On the walk to his house, I tried to silence both voices and just focus on the sidewalk beneath my shoes. When I knocked this time, he opened the door quicker, wearing actual pants and a button-down shirt that looked like it had seen better decades. His hair was combed, but there were shadows under his eyes. You came back, he said, like he'd honestly expected the opposite. Of course I came back, I replied. I bring offerings. Behold, the sacred grocery bags. He laughed, a real laugh this time, not the fragile ones he'd been giving me. You're something else, Mara, he said. Inside, I put the groceries away, quietly tossing anything questionable. I moved slowly, narrating what I was doing, not because he needed to know where the cereal went, but because people deserved to hear their own lives being considered. We fell into a routine over the next few weeks that no one officially agreed to, but both of us depended on. Every day, I'd work my shift at the diner, then head to his house. Sometimes I'd bring groceries. Sometimes just coffee and a to-go cup the way he liked it, even though I could have made it in his kitchen. He'd complain that I was wasting good diner coffee on a relic, but he drank every drop. I helped organize his medications into those little plastic containers with the days of the week labeled in cheap blue letters. I labeled drawers and cabinets with sticky notes when I realized he sometimes forgot where things were. I read the newspaper to him when his eyes got tired, my voice stumbling over the names of politicians and local Little League MVPs. He told me stories about Dorothy, their first date, their worst fight, the way she used to dance in the kitchen when her favorite song came on, even if there was no music playing. He talked about his son in Seattle in that careful, curated way people talk when they don't want you to see the cracks. He's successful, Walter would say. Good job, good salary. Big meetings, important people. That's what I wanted for him. I told him, be more than me. Go further than me. He took it seriously. And your grandson? I'd ask sometimes. Marcus, he'd say, like the name itself carried weight. Smart kid. Too smart, maybe. He figured out early that the world rewards speed, not presence. What do you mean? He's always running, Walter said. Running toward money, toward deals, toward the next big thing. I don't think anyone ever taught him that sometimes the most important moments are the ones where you're not going anywhere. I could hear the regret woven into his words like threads he couldn't unpick. Does he call? I asked. Sometimes, Walter said too quickly. Texts, emails, you know how it is now. How are you, Grandpa? With a smiley emoji. I send back, still alive. He hearts it. We both pretend that means more than it does. It hurt to hear that, but I didn't know how to fix it. I wasn't his family. I was just the waitress who showed up after her shift. One evening, as I was tucking a blanket around his legs and turning down the volume on the TV, he watched me with a serious expression I hadn't seen before. Why do you do this? He asked suddenly. And don't say it's because you're bored. You're too tired to be bored. I took a breath and sat down on the edge of the coffee table so we were closer to eye level. Because someone should, I said. Because you matter. Because kindness doesn't mean much if we only offer it when it's convenient. And because I know what it feels like to be alone. He studied my face like he was reading a book. Who was there for you? He asked. The question hit a bruise I usually kept well hidden. My mom got sick when I was 16, I said. Cancer, the expensive kind, of course. My dad left before that, said he couldn't watch her fade like that, but I think he just didn't want to deal with the bills and the diapers reversing, you know? Walter's eyes softened. I'm so sorry, Mara, he said. I worked, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. After school, then full-time. Scrubbed tables instead of writing essays. Mom died right before I was supposed to start college. The money I saved went to the debt. Life kept going. People said, "You're so strong," like that was a compliment, but really it just meant there was no one else to fall apart, so I didn't. I forced a small smile. Some nights, I come home and realize I hadn't heard my own name all day, I said. Just miss or excuse me or refill. It does something to you. He reached out, his hand shaky but deliberate, and placed it over mine. You deserve more than that, he said. Maybe, I answered. But this is what I got. And if I can keep someone else from feeling that invisible, even just a little bit, then maybe it means something. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I felt something unspoken pass between us, like a quiet agreement. After that talk, I stopped feeling like I was just helping a customer. We were something else, not quite family, not quite friends in the usual sense, but bound together by a kind of unspoken contract. I would show up and he would let me. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon at the diner, Rosie cornered me near the dish pit. You've been cutting your post-shift overtime a lot lately, she said. And I'm not blind. I know you're going to see him. Walter, I said automatically. His name is Walter. Yes, Walter, she sighed. Look, I'm not saying you shouldn't care. I'm just saying you have to be careful. If something happens, his family could say you were taking advantage of him. People talk. Lawyers exist. I've seen it. I'm not taking anything from him, I said, stung. I'm giving time. If that's a crime, they can arrest me for first-degree basic human decency. Her expression softened, but she didn't back down completely. I know your heart's in the right place, she said. But the world doesn't always care where your heart is. It cares what it can prove. Her words slid under my skin and stayed there, a low hum of worry that I couldn't quite tune out. Still, every day when my shift ended, my feet carried me to Walter's house like they had their own logic. As winter crept in, he grew weaker. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single day where everything changed. It was in the little things, the way he needed 2 hands to lift his mug, the longer pauses when he walked across the room, the way he sometimes stopped mid-sentence, searching for a word that had slipped just out of reach. One evening, I found him asleep in his chair, the TV flickering blue light across his face. For a terrifying second, he looked so still that my heart dropped into my stomach. I rushed to his side, calling his name, and his eyes flew open. Mara? He said, confused. What time is it? Time to give me a heart attack, I muttered, pressing a hand over my racing chest. He laughed weakly. Sorry, he said. Guess I'm practicing for the big sleep. Don't joke like that, I snapped, sharper than I meant to. The room went quiet. I swallowed and sat down. Please. Just don't. His expression softened. Okay, he said gently. No more jokes like that. We sat in silence for a moment. The TV murmuring in the background, the clock ticking on the wall. You know, he said finally, I spent most of my life trying to build something big enough that people would remember me. A business. A name. Something permanent. But in the end, it's the small things I don't want to lose. Like what? I asked, like someone remembering how I take my coffee, he said. Like you sitting here complaining about my terrible jokes. Like knowing that when I open my eyes, I'm not the only one who knows I exist. I blinked back sudden tears and nodded, unable to trust my voice. The days blurred after that work, Walter, sleep, repeat. On some level, it felt unsustainable, like walking a tightrope with no net. But there was also a strange sense of rightness to it. Like for the first time in a long time, my exhaustion had a purpose that wasn't just surviving. I didn't realize how attached I'd become until the night everything shifted for good. I didn't realize how much my life had started to orbit around Walter until the morning the phone rang at the diner and my world tilted so hard I felt it in my bones. It was just after the breakfast rush. I was wiping down a booth when Rosie called out from behind the counter, her voice tight in a way I instantly recognized. "Mara," she said, "phone, it's someone asking for you." I frowned. No one called me here except bill collectors, and they usually didn't sound nervous. I took the receiver, pressing it to my ear with a damp hand. "Hello? Is this Mara Brennan?" A woman asked gently. "Yes. This is Susan. I'm the hospice nurse assigned to Mr. Finch." Her voice softened on his name. "I'm so sorry to tell you this, but Walter passed away early this morning." For a second, I swear the diner just disappeared. The clatter, the voices, the smell of coffee, all of it fell away like someone had cut the sound. My throat closed. I tried again. "How?" "Peacefully," she said, "very peacefully. In his sleep. He wasn't in pain." I held onto the counter as my knees threatened to give. My mouth tasted like someone had stuffed it with sand. "He listed you as his emergency contact," she added, like she already knew that would break something in me, and it did. I stood there, gripping the phone so hard my fingers ached, while grief punched through my chest sharp enough to steal my breath. I didn't even try to hide it. Tears hid the counter. My breathing grew loud and uneven. A few regulars turned to look, but no one approached. When I finally managed to hang up, Rosie stepped from behind the counter and wrapped her arms around me. "Take the rest of the day," she whispered. "Go, just go." I cried in the kitchen for almost 20 minutes, loud, messy, gut-deep sobs that shook through my shoulders like a storm. It wasn't just sadness. It was the feeling of something ending too soon, too suddenly. The feeling of a chapter ripping in the middle of a sentence. He was gone. Just like that. The quiet walk to his house felt different this time, not anxious, not hopeful. Just heavy. The curtains were still drawn. The little shoes were still on the porch. Everything frozen in place, waiting for someone who wouldn't come back. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Instead, I sat on the porch steps and cried until my head hurt. The funeral was 3 days later. Small. Too small. Almost insultingly small. It was held in a modest chapel near the senior living facility. I arrived early, partly because I didn't trust myself to walk into a room full of people staring, partly because I didn't want him to be alone. But he would have been if I hadn't shown up. The room was nearly empty when the service began, just me, the hospice nurse, and 3 neighbors I'd never met, all of them murmuring quietly like they were afraid to disturb the air. A man said some prayers, someone read a poem. I don't remember any of it. I only remember staring at the closed casket and thinking, he deserved more than this. More people, more voices. More witnesses to the fact that he lived. About halfway through, the door opened with a loud, breathless thud. A man in an expensive suit rushed in, panting slightly, his phone still in hand like he'd been answering emails in the parking lot. "I'm Marcus Finch," he said loudly. "Walter's grandson. This is it." He looked around the room, expecting, I don't know, a crowd, a polished ceremony. A proper goodbye for a man who'd built something once, decades before. Instead, he found 4 strangers and the granddaughter he never noticed existed. I stood slowly. The hospice nurse almost said something, but I beat her to it. "You're looking at everyone," I said. Marcus froze, his face flushing anger. Shame, maybe both. "I was busy," he said, defensive already. "I had work. I tried to get an earlier flight." He died alone, I said quietly, my voice cracking. He spent his last months waiting for someone to check on him. Waiting to be seen. The chapel felt even smaller after I said it. The kind of small that hurts. Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes dropped to the floor. I'm sorry, he murmured, but it didn't sound like he was talking to me. He didn't stay long after the service. He left quietly, without looking at me again. I thought that was the end. A sad man, a lonely death, a grandson too busy, a waitress who loved him like family but had no real claim to anything he left behind. I mourned him in the only ways I knew how. I kept his booth empty for days, wiping it down slowly, refusing to let anyone else sit there. I made his usual order once and let it get cold on purpose. I wore the necklace he had once said reminded him of Dorothy. And then 2 weeks later, everything changed. I had just finished handing out receipts at the diner when the bell over the door chimed. I glanced up, expecting a regular or someone wanting coffee to go. Instead, Marcus walked in. But he wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits flanked him, serious, organized, carrying briefcases. Lawyers. My stomach dropped so violently I felt the ground sway. He's going to say I took advantage of him. He's going to accuse me of manipulating him. He's going to take everything. The possibilities came fast, sharp, cold. Rosie looked up from the counter and raised an eyebrow like she was already bracing for impact. Mara Brennan? One of the lawyers asked. Yes, I whispered. We need to speak with you regarding Mr. Walter Finch's estate. My breath caught. My mouth went dry. I don't want anything, I said immediately, terrified. I didn't help him for... We know, Marcus cut in, his voice unexpectedly quiet. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He looked wrecked. Like he hadn't slept in days. His shoulders sagged like the suit was made of lead. There's something we need to share with you, he said. And something I need to hear with you present. People were staring. Rosie stepped forward in that protective way she had. You can use the back booth, she said sharply. And keep your voices down. This is still a diner, not a courtroom. We sat at Walter's old booth, the one with the sunlight hitting the corner of the table, the one where he folded his newspaper and stirred his coffee just so. The familiarity of the space made my chest tighten. The lawyer opened a folder, pulled out an envelope, and placed it gently on the table. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting on the front shaky but unmistakably his. To Marcus. Read only with Mara present. Marcus's hands trembled as he picked it up. He stared at the envelope for a long moment like he wasn't sure he deserved to open it. Finally, he tore it carefully and unfolded the letter. When he began to read, his voice broke on the first sentence. Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The diner noise faded again, like the universe knew when to be quiet. I don't blame you for being busy, he continued, the tremor in his voice deepening. Life is demanding. And I was just an old man who didn't want to bother anyone. My throat tightened. I gripped the edge of the booth until my nails dug into the vinyl. But I want you to know about Mara, he read. She is the waitress who made me feel seen again. She makes $8 an hour plus tips. She has nothing extra to give. And yet every day, she gave me everything that mattered. My breath hitched. She remembered my coffee, he read. She remembered my birthday. She saw me when I had become invisible to the world. Including you. Marcus's voice cracked on that last line. He blinked rapidly, tears spilling despite his effort to hold them back. I'm leaving her the house, he continued softly, because she gave me something worth more than property. She gave me dignity in my final chapter. My heart stopped. The house? My house? No. I didn't want that. I didn't ask for that. Marcus took a shaky breath and kept reading. Learn from her, Marcus. Success means nothing if you're too busy to love people. Wealth means nothing if you forget how someone takes their coffee. Be better than I taught you to be. Be more like Mara. By the time he finished reading, Marcus was crying openly, shoulders shaking, tears dropping onto the paper like raindrops making the ink blur. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with a grief that wasn't mine to carry, but somehow lived in my chest anyway. Finally, he looked up at me. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know he was so lonely. I didn't know. I didn't know I failed him. You didn't fail him, I said automatically, even though part of me wasn't sure. You loved him. He knew that. I was so focused on making him proud, he said, wiping his face. On being successful. I thought that was enough. He let out a broken laugh. I never realized he just wanted me to sit with him. To listen. To be there. His voice softened into something that almost sounded like a plea. Teach me, he whispered. Teach me how to see people. The way you saw him. And that was the moment, the real moment, when everything shifted again. Because grief had brought us to the same booth for the first time, but what happened next was something else entirely. I didn't know what to say at first. No one had ever asked me to teach them anything, not about people, not about empathy. I wasn't a therapist or a saint. I was a waitress who spent most of her life trying to hold herself together with coffee, humor, and whatever scraps of kindness I had left at the end of the day. But when Marcus looked at me, eyes still wet, letter trembling in his hand, I realized something humbling and terrifying at the same time. He wasn't asking for perfection. He was asking for a chance. And for the first time since Walter died, I felt something new break through the grief purpose. Okay, I said softly. I'll try. He nodded, swallowing hard, like the agreement itself was already heavier than he expected. The lawyers gathered their papers and left us alone at the booth. Marcus didn't move for a long moment. He stared at the empty seat across from him, the same seat Walter had sat in every morning, then exhaled a shaky breath. I should have been here, he whispered. I shouldn't have let him fade. You can't rewrite what's already happened, I said gently, but you can honor it. And you can show up differently now. He closed his eyes, letting the words land where they needed to. That was the start of something strange and unexpected, a friendship I never saw coming, with someone I judged as harshly as he judged himself. Marcus started coming to the diner every morning, not because he loved diner food, but because he said it reminded him of what mattered. At first, he sat awkwardly, unsure of what to do with his hands or his silence. He wasn't used to slowness. He wasn't used to people without agendas, but he watched. He watched me remember people's orders without writing them down. He watched me ask the trucker with the bad back how his physical therapy was going. He watched me refill the coffee of the old woman who always sat alone, then sit beside her for a few minutes just to ask about her day. He watched me see people. And little by little, he started trying it himself. The first time he asked a customer their name, he stumbled over the question like it was a foreign language. The first time he remembered a regular's order, he said it with the pride of someone reciting a line in a school play. But he didn't stop. He didn't retreat. He didn't give up. He asked Rosie if he could shadow me for a while, something that initially made her laugh so hard she had to put down a tray, but she let him stay. She said anyone willing to work for free was already suspiciously noble or suspiciously stupid, and she wasn't sure which category he fell into. Weeks turned into months. He started cutting back his hours at work. He canceled meetings to spend mornings at the diner. He learned the names of every elderly customer, every lonely person who maybe didn't have anyone else noticing them. And then he took it further. I don't want his house to just sit there, he told me one afternoon, while rearranging sugar packets like he was defusing a bomb. It shouldn't be empty. He wouldn't want that. We should do something with it. The idea unfolded slowly, then all at once. A community space. For seniors. For the lonely. For anyone who needed a warm place to sit, a coffee, a conversation, a reminder that they were still visible. What would we call it? I asked. He paused, thinking, then a small smile formed. Walter's Corner, he said. The name settled into my chest like a warm light. We spent the next months renovating the house, painting walls, fixing creaky floors, turning the living room into a cozy coffee nook with mismatched chairs that felt like they belonged together anyway. We put bookshelves by the window where the sun hit soft in the afternoon. We hung photos of local seniors laughing at community events. We set up a big table in the dining room for puzzles, dominoes, stories, anything that helped people feel less alone. And people came, widows, veterans, quiet men who'd outlived everyone. Women who missed the sound of someone asking about their day. People who didn't need much, just a seat, a cup of coffee, a human presence. In helping them, Marcus found something he didn't know he'd lost. In watching him, I found something I didn't know I deserved. We didn't rush whatever was forming between us. Grief isn't the doorway you can run through, it's a hallway you walk slowly. But we walked it together. Not out of obligation or guilt, but because something about this strange, quiet partnership made life feel less heavy. 1 year after Walter's passing, we held the grand opening of Walter's Corner. The house was fuller than it had ever been when Walter was alive. Laughter filled the rooms. The smell of fresh coffee drifted down the hall. Old hands held mugs like they were holding memories they didn't want to spill. I stood by the front window, looking at the crowd, faces wrinkled and smiling. People who had been invisible until anyone, pointed a light in their direction. Marcus stepped beside me, his hand brushing mine, not grabbing, just there, warm, present. You think he knows? He asked quietly. I swallowed hard. The question hit me in a place no one could see. That he changed everything, he added, voice thick with emotion. I looked out at the room, at the community we built from his absence, at the connection that had grown from his last wish, at the lives he touched without even knowing it. I think, I said softly, that he always believed one act of kindness could change everything. He just needed someone to prove it to him first. An elderly woman approached us then, holding a mug between trembling hands. Excuse me, dear, she said to me, smiling kindly. How do you take your coffee? My breath caught. 2 sugars, I whispered. No cream, she nodded as if filing away something sacred. I'll remember that, she said. Everyone deserves to be remembered. My eyes stung, but I didn't look away. I let the moment settle in, sink in, root itself somewhere deep inside me. And that was when I finally understood what Walter had been trying to teach me all along, something I hadn't been ready to hear. Something I'd been too tired and too scared to believe. We're not here to be remembered by history, or by monuments, or by wealth, or by achievements that look good on paper but feel hollow in your chest. We're here to be remembered by each other. In the small rituals, the quiet mornings, the ordinary kindnesses that don't make headlines but save lives anyway. We're here to say, in our own imperfect ways, you matter. You're not alone. And someone remembers how you take your coffee. And if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered whether your small acts matter, whether noticing someone is enough, I hope this story reminds you that it is. If this touched you, even a little, please like the video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for the one small kindness that will change everything.